Hello everyone and welcome back to Gemnic Science. Today we are diving into a very important topic, which is the steroid hormones and their mechanisms of action. Before we go into their exact mechanisms of action, let's build a strong foundation by understanding some key concepts. First of all, what are hormones? When we said hormones, they are simply chemical messengers which is being produced by the endocrine glands. And some common example of this endocrine gland, we have the hypothalamus, pancreas, kidneys, and then the thymus. And notice that these hormones travel through the bloodstream to regulate some various bodily functions like the growth, metabolism, reproduction, and then the stress response. It's important to understand that hormones can be broadly divided into mainly two parts. We have the ones that are hydrophilic and the hydrophobic. The word hydrophilic is a combined word which is hydro and then the philic. The word hydro means water, philic means love. Therefore, peptide or protein hormones, they are hydrophilic, meaning that they love water. And some common examples of that, we have the insulin and we have the glucagon. Here we have the hydrophobic, which is also a combined word. Hydro water, the phobic means hate. The steroid hormones basically, they do not like water or they tend to stay away from water. Example, we have the cortisol, testosterone, when we have the estrogen. So, to make it ridiculously easy, you can just put it this way by saying the peptide hormone or the protein hormone, these are water soluble and cannot cross the plasma membrane easily. And here we have some example. And we can put it also this way by saying steroid hormones are lipid soluble and can easily pass through the cell membrane. And here we have some example on the screen. So let's go deep and look at what are the steroid hormones. When we say steroid hormones, they are mostly derived from what we call the cholesterol, and here we have it on top of the screen. And they are mainly produced by the adrenal cortex. A very quick review on that. We said we have what we call the kidney, and on top of the kidney pulse, we have what we call the adrenal gland. From the inside of the adrenal gland, we have the medulla. From the outside, we call it the adrenal cortex, which the adrenal cortex is also crucial in the production of some important hormones. Example, we have what we call the steroid hormones basically. Not just from the adrenal cortex, the steroid hormones can also be produced from the gonads and the placenta. So notice that some example of the steroid hormones, we have the glucocorticoid, mineralocorticoid, and we have the sex hormones. Notice that the glucocorticoid basically produce what we call the cortisol, the mineralocorticoid produce the aldosterone, and the sex hormones we have the estrogen, progesterone, and then the testosterone. So notice that the glucocorticoid basically help with metabolism and stress response, while the mineralocorticoid help to regulate sodium and water level. The last but not the least, which are the sex hormones, which are important for reproduction and secondary sexual characteristics. To make the mechanisms of action for the steroid hormones, which is MOA of the steroid hormones, ridiculously easy, we can first of all use this mnemonic which we call help bring good news changes, but rather it's supposed to be help bring new good changes. These are the steps that the steroid hormones follows. Notice that the help simply stands for what we call the hormone diffusion. And here comes the bring, which simply stands for the binding to the intracellular receptor. And here comes the new, which is the nuclear translocation. And the good, which simply stands for gene activation and protein synthesis. Gene activation and the protein synthesis. The C, which is the last but not the least, which is cellular response. And we said the cellular response basically will be the one to have an effect that will produce things like the growth, the stress response, etc., etc. So let's wipe out this and start explaining the mechanisms step by step. If you're already enjoying this video, please just do me a favor by hitting on the subscribe button. On the mechanisms of action, I need you to understand one thing, which is unlike the peptide hormones, the steroid hormones do not bind to the cell surface receptor. Instead, they directly enter the target cell by diffusion through the lipid bilayer of the membrane. So let's say here we have what we call the plasma membrane. So let's write it in short. Let's say the plasma. Let's just write it in full. Okay, we can put it this way, plasma membrane. So inside of the plasma membrane, and remember we said the plasma membrane is made up of what we call the phospholipid bilayer, right? So on the inside we have what we call the nucleus. So the environment, which is this, we call it the cytoplasm. So looking at the first thing from the mnemonic, which we said is the HELP, which this HELP simply stands for hormone diffusion. So we say since the steroid hormones are lipid soluble, they easily pass through the cell membrane without requiring a receptor. So imagine we have a hormone, or rather not just hormone, specifically a steroid hormone from the outside. It can easily pass through this plasma membrane. And let's say here the hormone finds itself at this spot. What will happen from our mnemonic second is going to be bring, which is binding to the intracellular receptor, meaning that from the inside we already have a receptor. So what will happen if this hormone bind into this receptor? This is the result. The receptor will be at this point, and here comes the hormone. And notice that if a hormone binds into a receptor, especially from the inside, we call it HRC, which simply stands for hormone receptor complex. And here we are going to have, if we have combination of these two, we are going to have the HRC, which is the hormone receptor complex. So the receptor complex basically is a carrier that will carry this hormone into the nucleus. And that is where the nuclear translocation comes in, which says the hormone receptor complex enter into the nucleus to bind hormone response elements on the DNA. HRC will basically bind on HRS. HRS simply stands for the hormone response element on DNA. So this is how it's going to look like. Here we're going to have our hormone. Immediately it gets activated. Let's say we are going to have something like this. Okay. And what we call this guy here, we call it the activated complex. Remember, hormone receptor complex, when it finds itself inside the nucleus, we call it the word activated complex. Make sense? Yes. So what will really happen at this point is going to be the gene activation, because once it attaches to the DNA, this complex triggers gene transcription leading to the production of specific messenger RNA, specific messenger RNA molecules, which from this point we are going to have something like this. Remember, our hormone is going to be inside, and here it's going to cross, which makes sense to me, right? Here we have the receptor, we have the hormone, and here we have the activated DNA at this point. So notice that this mRNA, which stands for the messenger RNA, basically is a molecule which moves to the ribosomes. And at the ribosome, this is where they direct the synthesis of a specific protein that bring about the hormones effects. So from this point, you are going to have mRNA. The mRNA will be the one to direct into the ribosome. And from here, we are going to have what we call the protein synthesis. Protein synthesis. So, the cellular response, which is the newly synthesized protein which carry out the physiological effect of the hormones, such as regulating the metabolism, immune function, and then the reproduction, which we mentioned earlier. So, a very quick review on everything which we talked about. First, we say the steroid hormones, they easily enter the cell because they are lipid soluble. So, they bind into the intracellular receptors in the cytoplasm, or the nucleus rather. And you need to understand that the hormones receptor complex activate gene transcription, leading to the protein synthesis, and these proteins then mediate the hormones effect in the body. So this is it for the steroid hormones, right, basically. So I hope you find this video helpful. Please, if you do, just do me a favor by subscribing to Gemnic Science. I would really appreciate it. Thank you for watching, and see you. Hello everyone, and welcome back to Gemnic Science.